Notorious Liverpool hardman Tony Sinnott was also known by the name Tony the Tiger. As an ex-professional boxer who stood at 5 feet 9 inches tall, Tony had shocked the country when he won an All-Ireland welterweight title in 1981. Sadly, he wasn't able to capture the British title in Bedford, losing in the final eliminator to Terry Marsh in 1984 by decision. After boxing, Tony had established a security firm with 2 mates that was responsible for manning the doors in some of Liverpool's known clubs like Arcadia. Like many retired sports stars and athletes, Tony the Tiger was known to charm people with his stories of challenging for a national title and of his boxing friends who often called him for tips. Tony often told people that he could go a dozen rounds without breaking a sweat and how he loved to hurt people. Not only was that a true statement, it was also a warning to some of Liverpool's criminals and other security firms. Now, to some people, Tony was still a celebrity, and to others, Tony was a bully, a nasty piece of work, and a man who often used his hands to get deals done. Tony the Tiger also built up a reputation of being handy with a blade. Case in point, in 1995, Tony was cleared of putting a duster on his knuckles and ambushing former champion boxer Alan Rudkin and his 2 sons. Alan had gone to the police after he had suffered injuries to his chest and face. However, Tony Sinnott was able to convince 3 witnesses to change their story, to say it was not possible as Tony had been on a fishing trip in Anglesey. Now, rumours say that Tony did not pay the witnesses off, and they had changed the story due to the fear that Tony imposed on them. And then on April 23rd, 1999, Tony Sinnott's life would come to an abrupt end in the most brutal and inhumane fashion. This was a clear execution, pre-planned. The security consultant who had treated his business partners, then 40-year-old David Smith and James Crawley, as something he had scraped off the bottom of his shoe, David and James were said to have grown frustrated at Tony's hard-headedness and the fact that he had created enemies of rival security firms that had sparked tension in the Liverpool club scene and, of course, the door walls. Tony had arrived at a small garage unit and scrapyard on Shore Road Industrial Estate at around 5:30 in the morning. The father of 3 had walked through the unit as though he owned the place, despite James being a tenant of the garage where the K took place. The prosecution believed that James Crawley had planned the M with David Smith, with James placing a call to David to let him know that Tony the Tiger was in the garage. The garage was also known to be used as a meeting point to stash Dra, Class A and Class B. Tony was caught completely off guard by a man who used a scarf and tied it round his face, and also wore a hat. He ran into the garage. Outstretched in the hand was a 9mm semi-automatic. Others say it was a submachine. Once they had took aim at Tony the Tiger, the M was a matter of when, not if. 40-year-old Tony Sinnott was struck with ammo 18 times out of a possible 22, target area, head and chest. When Tony was discovered, he was on his knees covered in red, and a worker of the garage, Alex Sewell, had allegedly saw the M take place. Now, David Smith, who was the alleged shooter, then put the GUN to Alex's neck and frogged marched him outside to his grey Ford XR2. He then took the keys. Alex said in court, as soon as he started pressing the trigger, I could see him. I looked through the bus which had no windows in. I was wondering what it was. He went in between a Ford Fiesta and a Ford Orion, but by then he had already pressed the trigger again and again and again. I was confused as to what was going on. As he was finishing, I popped my head up a bit too soon and he shouted, "Get out, come here." I pulled my arms up pleading with the triggerman not to K me. He grabbed me by the scruff of the neck, put a GUN against my neck and marched me out to my car. I pleaded with him not to K me. He spread-eagled me on the car and stuck the gun in my neck harder and says, "Give me your keys and mobile phone." I said I don't have a phone, and he took the keys off me and manhandled me back into the garage. He then told me to stay there. When police visited David Smith's home, an officer recovered a Puma bag that was hidden behind the chest of drawers in the bedroom. The bag was swabbed by forensics, and it contained traces of GUN residue. Now David Smith says that the residue must have come from a nail gun, and he couldn't have been involved in the M as he had been with his girlfriend. Both James Crawley and David Smith had been arrested in November 1999. Now in court, James Crawley says that he was in the loft at the time of the M, and unfortunately he could not make out the trigman. He also went on to say that he and Tony Sinnott were good mates, but he was a man who had a lot of enemies. Despite witness testimony, both David Smith and James Crawley were found not guilty of the murder of Tony Sinnott, and 25 years later, the M has still not been solved. Whether we like it or not, or whether we believe it, karma is real. Stay safe.